He hurled a trash can through my windshield like he was auditioning for a remake of Anger Management, and I, apparently, was the unpaid prop. 72 years of living will teach you 2 things fast: how to make a casserole that solves most problems, and how to recognize entitlement when it takes a running start at your Buick. I just signed the papers on Jenkins Ridge, 40 acres of stubborn soil, 1 gossiping scarecrow, and a fence that knew every secret in the county. I'd planned to retire to something gentle: a small porch, a cat that respected personal space, and mornings that didn't involve shouting at tractors. Then my son, Kevin, and his wife, Crystal, who owns dramatics the way some people own dishwashers, decided the farm sale was their rite of passage rather than my decision. Kevin swept in like a man who'd been eating entitlement for breakfast. "You sold the farm," he said, like it was an accusation and not a sentence. "Yes," I said. "I sold the farm to someone who actually called me back last Tuesday." He didn't like the answer. Entitlement is a strange condition. It grows in the absence of phone calls and the presence of credit cards. Crystal, who wears confidence and loud lipstick in equal measure, declared the sale a family betrayal. "That money belongs to the family," she announced, as though the family had taken out a line of credit with God. She then did something that would make the neighbors tell the story with relish for decades. She grabbed the kitchen trash can and threw it through my car window. The can cracked the glass with the kind of satisfaction people reserve for popping bubble wrap. Coffee sprayed. My Buick looked like the aftermath of a parade float crash. Kevin stared at the ruin with all the remorse of a man who'd just misplaced his remote control. I stood there, heart punching my ribs like it owed me money, and for a moment the world narrowed to shards of glass glittering in the sunday. People assume anger makes you loud. Sometimes it makes you very, very calm. I set my jaw, wiped a shard of glass off my sleeve, and invited them for coffee like a hostess who hadn't yet decided whether to call the cops or the opera. They followed me inside, heads high, voices high, and a plan written in the air: intimidation. I poured coffee strong, as honest as a truth serum, and served it with a smile that had practiced patience for decades. Then I slid 2 envelopes across the table and watched them rip into them like wolves who'd been promised steak. Inside, not cash, but 3 tidy things: a copy of the sale contract, signed, sealed, legal, a photograph of me and the farm in better days, and a single piece of paper in my neat handwriting. 5 words, no check, no confession, just the truth I owed them. "You just inherited your problem," it read. Kevin's jaw dropped. Crystal's face changed from fury to something warmer and less fashionable: fear. Because what I offered them wasn't money, it was consequence. The years of borrowing without returning, the excuses living rent-free in their mouths, the idea that a mother's kindness equals an open ATM, all of it landed on that one phrase. Before either of them could craft another insult or a new plan of petty violence, something else happened. 3 measured, businesslike knocks on my door. Not the clumsy rhythm of an angry neighbor, not the sing-song way kids announce their arrival. These were the knocks of people who carry paperwork and very little patience. Kevin froze the way guilty people always do, in the exact moment between bravado and reality. Crystal's mascara started doing something interesting, running like a sad, glittery map. I opened the door. 2 men stood on my porch. Suits, badges, and an expression I've learned to interpret as, "We read the bank statements." The taller one cleared his throat and said, in the voice of someone who enjoyed ruining people's alibis, "Mrs. Jenkins, we need to ask you and your son a few questions about the recent sale of Jenkins Ridge. If the trash can was Act 1, whatever these men were holding in their folder was Act 2, and the curtain was about to lift on a scene none of us expected." I smiled, because sometimes the most satisfying moment in life is watching entitlement realize it has met an auditor. The men stepped into my kitchen like undertakers who also did accounting. They didn't ask for coffee, they didn't comment on the shattered car window or the two faces frozen across the table. They just opened their black folders and started using my dining room as an interrogation set. "Mrs. Jenkins," the taller one said, "we're investigating irregularities in the sale of Jenkins Ridge. The buyer's payment passed through 3 accounts before being flagged for possible fraud." I took a slow sip of my own coffee, the real stuff, not the decaf I'd served my guests. "Well," I said, "you've come to the right place for irregularities." I raised one. Kevin squirmed. "This is ridiculous! I didn't do anything!" The shorter agent, who looked like he'd seen every lie ever attempted, raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Jenkins, your name is on 2 of the accounts." Silence, the kind that fills a room like a gas leak. Crystal broke first. "You mean those accounts weren't Mom's? Kevin, you said." "Crystal," he hissed, "shut up." "Oh no, please don't," I said sweetly. "By all means, keep talking. We're all learning new things today." The agent slid a photo across the table. "Mr. Jenkins, do you recognize this?" Kevin blinked. That's my email." "Yes," the agent said. "And this is the transfer confirmation you sent to a Cayman account under your name. Do you have an explanation?" Kevin's mouth opened and closed like a fish debating life choices. It was Mom's idea." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me? The last time I used a computer was to Google how to stop receiving coupons for hearing aids." The taller agent turned to me. "Mrs. Jenkins, are you aware of these transfers?" "I'm aware of a lot of things, Agent," I said, "including the fact that my son hasn't visited in months. But apparently he's been using my name in more ways than one." Kevin jumped up, hands trembling. Look, I was helping manage things, all right? It's complicated." "Kevin," I said, calm as a Sunday sermon, "you couldn't manage a grocery list without forgetting the milk. Don't insult our intelligence." Crystal, bless her dramatic little heart, leaned forward, mascara trembling. "Wait, so you did move the money?" "Crystal," Kevin barked, red-faced, "do you mind?" "Yes," she snapped. "I do mind, because apparently I married a walking indictment." The shorter agent's lip twitched a micro smile. "Mr. Jenkins, we'll need you to come downtown for further questioning." "I'm not going anywhere," Kevin muttered, puffing his chest like a turkey that didn't realize Thanksgiving was coming. The taller one pulled out a warrant. "Oh, I think you are." The handcuffs clicked, and for the first time since he learned how to throw tantrums, Kevin was speechless. Crystal started crying, the kind of tears that only show up when designer handbags and joint bank accounts are in danger. "This is your fault," she wailed at me. "If you'd just given him the money," I interrupted with a smile that could frost glass. "Sweetheart, if I'd given him the money, you'd have thrown yourself through my windshield." The agents led Kevin out, ducking under the doorframe. He didn't look back. Crystal did once with eyes that screamed something between hate and panic. Then she left, too, in a perfume cloud of defeat. The house went silent. the kind of silence that feels earned. I sat down, poured the last of my coffee, and finally opened the second envelope I'd hidden under the sugar jar. Inside was the deed, the real deed, to Jenkins Ridge. The farm I sold? That was a decoy 40 acres of worthless brush I'd bought years ago under a shell company. The real Jenkins Ridge was never sold. It was sitting exactly where it always was, under my name, safe, untouched. Kevin thought he was stealing my future. Turns out he'd been laundering the dirt off his own shovel. I leaned back, smiled at the absurdity of it all, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "Oh, honey, you've been robbing a ghost." Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered, expecting a telemarketer or another government voice. But the tone was low, familiar, dangerous. "Mrs. Jenkins," the voice said, "you don't know me, but I used to work with your husband. We need to talk about the land and the money." And just like that, my quiet victory turned into Act 2 of a mystery I didn't know I'd inherited. The man on the other end of the line had a voice like an old record, rough, cracked, and carrying a tune I didn't like. "Your husband didn't sell Jenkins Ridge to buy tractors," he said. "He bought that land to hide something. Now, I'm not the sort of woman who jumps at ghost stories or late-night conspiracies, but when a stranger mentions my late husband and the land my idiot son just tried to steal, my curiosity wakes up faster than my arthritis. I set down my coffee cup. "And who exactly are you?" "Name's Rick Mallory. I worked with Frank back before he retired. We handled the property deal together. And there's something in that soil you ought to know about." I didn't like his tone. It was the kind of tone people use when they know something they shouldn't, and they're proud of it. "What kind of something?" I asked. A pause. "The kind people kill for." Now, there are many things I expected to deal with in my 70s, high blood pressure, bad drivers, the occasional rogue squirrel in my attic, but not a posthumous murder plot. "Mr. Mallory," I said, my patience wearing thin, "you'd better start explaining before I hang up and call someone who carries a badge." He chuckled, not kindly. "Your husband wasn't just a farmer, ma'am. He was laundering money. Jenkins Ridge was his front, and when he died, he left something behind, something the wrong people still want." The line went dead. For a long minute, all I could hear was the tick of the kitchen clock, slow, steady, like the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. I looked out the window, and the fields that had been mine for decades suddenly seemed different, not comforting, secretive, watching. The next day, I drove out to the ridge. The morning mist hung low, the air thick with that wet smell of dirt and history. The scarecrow still stood crooked in the middle of the field, wearing Frank's old jacket, the one he refused to throw away, even after it lost both buttons and most of its dignity. I walked the fence line, boots crunching on frost, and tried to remember. Back when Frank was alive, he always kept one section of the barn locked. Said it was where the real work gets done. I never questioned it. After 30 years of marriage, you stop picking fights over locked doors. Well, not today. The padlock was still there, old and rusted, but intact. I pried it open with a crowbar that had seen better decades. Inside, the air smelled like metal and dust. The space was smaller than I remembered. Bare walls, a few tools, and a trapdoor under a tarp. "Frank, you sneaky devil." I pulled the tarp aside and found a steel hatch bolted into the floor. Now, at this point, most people would have called the sheriff or maybe a priest. But I've spent my life handling worse things than secrets. I've raised a son with a temper and a daughter-in-law who treats lip gloss like armour. I knelt down, grabbed the ring handle and pulled. The hinges groaned like they were waking from a bad dream. Below was a narrow stairwell, the air cool and stale. I turned on my phone's flashlight and descended. At the bottom sat a metal trunk, small, heavy, stamped with my husband's initials, and when I wiped away the dust, I saw something else carved faintly underneath. M.M., the same initials the man on the phone had just used. I crouched, staring at the trunk like it might grow teeth. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of fear, the kind that doesn't come from what's in front of you, but what's waiting behind it. I reached for the latch, and just as I touched it, a shadow crossed the light at the top of the stairs. Someone else was in the barn. There's a particular silence barns have, deep, dusty, and patient. It's the kind of quiet that lets you hear small things first. The creak of old wood, the shift of boots on gravel, the way your own breath suddenly feels like a confession. "Who's there?" I called. Voice steadier than I felt. No answer. Just footsteps on the boards above, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were confident, and that worried me. I turned off my flashlight, crouched low, and waited. When you've lived through 3 recessions, a tornado, and your son's teenage years, you learn the art of stillness. A shadow passed the top of the stairs, tall, broad-shouldered. A man. He stood there for a moment, outlined by the faint morning light seeping through the cracks in the barn walls. "Mrs. Jenkins," the voice drawled. I recognized it instantly. Rick Mallory, the man from the call. He came down the steps slow, one creaking board at a time. In his hand, he carried a flashlight and something metallic glinting in his jacket pocket. Not quite a gun, not quite not a gun. I stayed quiet, crouched near the trunk, one hand resting on the lid. He stopped halfway down, eyes glinting in the half-light. "Now, I know Frank must have told you something about this box," he said. "Where it came from, what's inside?" I let the seconds stretch. Then I straightened slowly, meeting his gaze. "He told me it's full of bad decisions," I said. "Seems he was right." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Frank owed me. That box is mine." "Funny," I said. "It's sitting on my land." "That's not your land, ma'am," he said, taking another step down. "Never was." I laughed softly. "You really think that's a line that'll work on a widow who's paid property taxes for 40 years? Something in my voice made him pause. His smirk faltered. Good. That meant he was still human. I glanced at the trunk again. The latch was rusted, but intact. If there was something worth killing for inside, I had to see it before he did. "Mind if I check your math, Mr. Mallory?" I said, casually, sliding my fingers along the lid. He noticed. "Don't," he said, voice dropping to something darker. "You don't know what's in there." "Oh, but I do know greed when I hear it," I replied. "You sound just like my son." He flinched at that, maybe surprised by the venom I packed into the word son. I used the distraction. With one swift motion, I flipped the latch and shoved the lid open. The air that came out was dry, stale, and heavy with time. Inside wasn't money, not jewelry, not gold. It was paperwork, neatly stacked, yellowed by age, each stamped with official seals, bank ledgers, business records, offshore transfers, all under one name, Franklin Jenkins and Amp, Associates, my husband's company. and underlined at the bottom of each page the co-signer, Richard Mallory. Rick swore under his breath. "You shouldn't have seen that." "Oh, honey," I said, "I've seen worse. I was married to it." He took another step forward, jaw tight. "You think you understand what you're holding? That paper ties me to $500,000 that disappeared. The people who lost it don't care that your husband's dead. They'll come for whoever has proof. And that's me now, isn't it?" I said. He nodded once. "Unless you hand it over." I sighed, brushing dust off the folder. "You really don't get it, do you? If I survived 3 decades of a stubborn husband and one criminally lazy son, I'm not about to die over someone else's bookkeeping." Rick frowned, unsure whether to threaten or beg. His hand twitched near his pocket. I didn't wait to find out which. With my free hand, I pulled my phone out and hit record. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Tell me again what's in this box, Rick." "Say it nice and clear for the microphone." He froze. Then his lips tightened into a sneer. "You think you're clever?" "No," I said. "I think I'm old, tired, and done being lied to." I took a step toward him, voice low. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door, and I'm going to keep these papers safe. You'll pretend you never called, never came here, and never used my husband's name again. Otherwise, this recording and every file in this box finds its way to the people you're scared of." His eyes darted to the phone, then to the stairs. For a long moment, I saw calculation in them, a flicker of survival instinct. Then slowly, he raised his hands. "You don't know what you're starting," he muttered. "Maybe not," I said, "but I know how to finish things." He backed up the steps, silent except for the boards creaking under his weight. The barn door opened, then slammed shut. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Then I looked back into the box, the papers, the ledgers, the evidence of 2 men who'd built a secret life under my nose. Tucked beneath them was a smaller envelope, sealed tight, labelled in Frank's handwriting. "If she ever finds this, tell her I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long while. Then, slowly, I opened it. Inside was a single photo of my husband and a teenage boy I didn't recognize. On the back, in Frank's scrawl, "His name is Mark. He's ours. Tell Kevin the truth." My knees nearly gave out. My husband had a son I never knew about, and apparently so did I. I sat on the barn floor for a long time, that photo trembling in my hands, the dirt underneath me suddenly colder than it had ever felt. My husband's neat handwriting, that familiar looping F in Franklin, stared back at me like it had been waiting all these years for the right storm to open it. "His name is Mark. He's ours. Tell Kevin the truth. I'd been married to Frank for 39 years. We'd buried parents, livestock, and one unfaithful dog together. We'd fought about everything: money, crops, his smoking, my nagging, and once a scarecrow I'd accidentally named after his boss. But never, not once, did he give me a reason to think there was someone else. Until now. The barn seemed to breathe with me, the old wood sighing under the weight of a secret too heavy for its beams. I looked at the photo again. Frank, maybe in his 40s, with a teenage boy who looked eerily like Kevin if you squinted and added a little more kindness around the eyes. Mark, my husband's son, my son's brother. And somehow the missing piece in this mess of money and ghosts. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking, and not from age. I made tea strong enough to wake the dead, which was fitting. considering my dead husband was now haunting me through office supplies. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo, trying to decide which was worse, that Frank had lied or that he'd wanted me to fix it. That's when I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. For one insane second, I thought Rick had come back, ready to finish what he started. I grabbed the nearest thing that could pass as a weapon, my cast iron skillet, heavy, loyal, unregistered. But when I looked through the window, it wasn't Rick, it was Kevin. He was out on bail, wearing the same flannel he'd been arrested in, except now it looked looser. His arrogance had shrunk 3 sizes. Crystal wasn't with him. That, at least, was a small mercy. He hesitated before knocking, like a boy, again the way he used to when he broke my good vase and came to confess. I opened the door. "Well," I said, "look what the justice system let out." "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I let him. Not because he deserved it, but because every mother knows curiosity is stronger than anger, at least for the first 5 minutes. He sat at the table, avoiding my eyes, pretending to study the pattern on the wood. "Mom," he started, "I'm sorry for everything, for the money, for yelling, for—" I interrupted. "For the trash can through my car window?" His face flushed. "Yeah, for that too." He looked older, not by years, by miles. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dad was never easy. You know that. He had his secrets. But did you ever think maybe he left more than we knew?" I blinked. "Why are you asking that?" He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. "When the feds took my stuff, they gave me a box of evidence to review with my lawyer. This was in it, addressed to you." I took it, heart thudding. The envelope was worn, sealed with tape that had yellowed, the handwriting Frank's again. I opened it with the same care you'd give a live wire. "Linda, if you ever read this, I've done something I can't undo. The ridge isn't what it seems. I built something for Mark, our boy. He never had a chance, and I couldn't stand to see him end up lost. I moved some money through the land enough to keep him safe. But if it comes to light, it'll look bad. Kevin will hate me. Maybe you too, but I trust you'll tell him when he's ready." At the bottom, in small, faded ink, "If Rick comes back, don't trust him. He's not the same man I worked with. He's desperate." Kevin leaned forward. "Who's Mark?" I looked at him, really looked. "My son, my stubborn, infuriating, half-broken boy. The one who thought inheritance meant money, not history. Your father's other son," I said softly. He froze, blinked once. "His what?" "Your half-brother." The words hit him like a slap he didn't see coming. He stood up, pacing. "So all this, the farm, the sale, the money, it's about him? Some kid we never knew about?" "Not a kid anymore," I said, "and I think he's still alive." He slammed his palm on the table. "Unbelievable. He ruins my life from the grave and leaves another son to get the rest." "Kevin," I said quietly, "your father wasn't trying to ruin you. He was trying to protect what he couldn't fix." He laughed bitterly. "Protect who? Himself?" "No," I said. "Mark." For a long time he didn't move, just stared at the photo I'd left on the table. He looked from the boy's face to mine, then back again. "He looks like me," he whispered. "Younger, kinder." Then he did something I didn't expect. He reached for the photo, not to throw it, not to rip it, but to hold it. Like maybe, for the first time, he understood There were worse things than being angry. Finally, he looked up. "If this Mark's still out there, I want to meet him," I sighed. "You might get your chance sooner than you think." "Why?" he asked. I turned the photo over and slid it toward him. "Because the man who called me the one who worked with your father, he said people are still looking for what Frank hid, and something tells me Mark might be one of them." Kevin went pale. "You think he's coming here?" I met his eyes. "I don't think, Kevin." "I know." And out past the window, the gravel driveway was no longer empty. A car had pulled in, old, dusty, idling, and through the windshield a man sat staring at the house. He looked about 40, and he had Frank's eyes. The sound of that engine idling outside my house crawled through the walls like a warning. Kevin moved toward the window, but I stopped him. "Let him come to us," I said. "We've chased enough ghosts for one lifetime." The car door creaked open, and the man stepped out. Mid-40s, tall, dressed in jeans and a worn jacket, the kind of man who looked like he'd spent more time fixing things than breaking them. His movements were careful, almost nervous, and when he looked toward the porch, I saw it. Frank's eyes. Same pale grey, same steadiness, the kind that could stop a room mid-lie. Kevin must have seen it too, because his voice cracked when he whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" "Seems like it," I said. The man hesitated at the bottom of the steps. "Linda Jenkins?" "Depends who's asking," I said, gripping the railing. "And what they want." He nodded once. Respectful. "My name's Mark. I think we might be family." "Well, that's a sentence you don't hear every day between strangers and half-buried secrets." Kevin stiffened beside me, every line in his face shouting no. I stepped aside, motioning him in. "If you've come this far, you might as well have coffee. Around here, nobody gets yelled at until they've had caffeine." He smiled, tired, cautious. "Guess I take after my dad." "Let's hope not," I muttered, pushing open the door. Inside, the air felt thick enough to chew. Mark sat across from Kevin at the kitchen table, the same table where my son once learned how to cheat at Monopoly. I poured 3 mugs of coffee and set them down like peace offerings. Kevin stared at him. "So what? You just show up one day? You've got Dad's eyes? So that makes you family?" Mark's jaw tightened. "No, what makes us family is that we were both lied to." That silenced him for a moment. Mark took out a folded envelope from his jacket. "This was in my mother's things. Found it after she passed last year. It's from your dad. Postmarked 15 years ago. He slid it across the table." Kevin didn't touch it, so I did. I unfolded the letter, same handwriting, same half-hearted apology loops Frank used when he was caught late for dinner. "Mark, if you're reading this, you're old enough to know the truth. I tried to keep your life separate, clean. I did wrong by your mother, but I want to make it right. The money in the Reach account isn't dirty anymore. I washed it through legitimate sales. It's yours when you're ready. But be careful. Rick doesn't know you exist, and if he finds out, he'll come for you too. Frank." I exhaled. "Well, congratulations, boys. Your father left you both a mess and an apology." Mark gave a half smile. "That's about what I expected." Kevin's fists clenched. "You think you can just show up and claim what's ours?" Mark met his glare calmly. "I don't want your money. I came because someone's been following me. A man named Rick Mallory. Said he worked with Dad. He wants something called the Ridge Papers." The words landed like a hammer. Kevin looked at me. "Mom, you didn't—" "Oh, I did," I said. "And they're safe." Mark's eyes widened. "You have them?" "I do. Locked away. And I suggest we keep it that way." But Mark shook his head. No, he's desperate, Mrs. Jenkins. He won't stop until he gets them. I've seen what he's capable of. I leaned forward. Meaning? Mark hesitated, then said softly, He killed my mother. The room went cold. Kevin's breath hitched. What? Mark's voice broke for the first time. 2 years ago, she died in what the police called an accident, a house fire. But before it happened, she told me Rick had been calling, asking about Frank, about the farm, about me. I sat back slowly. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Rick Mallory, the man from the barn, the one who'd stood 5 feet away from me with that half smile and those dead eyes. And suddenly, the threats didn't feel distant anymore. All right, I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor creeping through me. If he's after those papers, we make sure he never finds them, Kevin scoffed. And how are we supposed to do that, Mom? Call the cops? You think they'll believe us? A convict, a mystery brother, and a 72-year-old woman who keeps finding corpses in her family tree. Mark looked at me. There's another way. Burn them. I frowned. Burn them? He nodded. If the papers are gone, so is his leverage. He's got nothing left to chase. Kevin slammed his hand on the table. That's insane. Those papers prove Dad was laundering money. If they disappear, it looks like we're covering it up. And if they stay, Mark shot back, we're targets. They stared at each other, mirror images from different lives, both stubborn enough to burn down a barn if it proved a point. Finally, I stood. You're both wrong, I said. We're not burning anything. And we're not hiding either. They turned to me, in unison like 2 schoolboys caught by the teacher. We're going to end this properly, I said. If Rick wants his ghosts, we'll give him a séance. Kevin frowned. What are you planning, Mom? I smiled slow, sharp, the kind that had made more than one banker flinch. Oh, nothing dramatic. Just a little meeting. Tonight. Mark looked wary. Where? The Ridge, I said. Where it all started. Kevin blinked. You're luring him there? Exactly, I said, grabbing my coat. And this time, boys, we'll see who walks out of that farm for the last time. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills, a storm rolling in. Perfect weather for a reckoning. I like storms. They give dramatic people an excuse to be dramatic, and rain washes off cheap cologne. So when the sky looked like a bruise and the weather app threatened theatrical thunder, I knew it was a good night to settle old scores. We arrived at Jenkins Ridge like a small, very nervous committee of revenge, me with my flashlight and an umbrella I never trusted, Kevin carrying a toolbox because he thinks manliness comes with a hammer, and Mark steady as a plough holding the envelope with his mother's last letter as if it were a map. I'd called 2 favours in, Miss Lila, whose cardigan conceals a moral compass and a 38, and Sheriff Alvarez, who owes me a pie after I once drove 20 miles to bring him lasagna when he was on jury duty. They'd agreed to sit in their cars down the lane and wait for my signal. Are we really doing this? Kevin asked, voice the kind that needed encouragement and possibly a snack. We are, I said. We're walking into a barn like the people who write bad endings. And we're bringing witnesses. We set the scene like theatre people who've done this once or twice. I placed the old trunk, now empty, except for a recorder in the centre of the barn, and left the real ledgers locked in my glove compartment at the car. Mark readied a fake folder that would look believable enough to tempt a desperate man. We string up a cheap lamp to make shadows dramatic. I wore my best glare. At 10, like a bat signal for bad men, I lit a lantern and left it on the porch. A mark, as old conmen know, follows light. We waited. The wind started as a whisper, then became a cymbal crash. The air smelled of wet hay and brimstone. I thought about my husband, about the way he used to whistle when rain came, a small, private song. I hoped he was humming somewhere that didn't involve ledgers. Rick arrived smelling like a wetsuit and worse choices. He slouched under the eave, hands deep in pockets, eyes darting like a man who knows exits and counts them carefully. He had that crooked smile that meant negotiation or blackmail, depending on how charitable you felt. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, voice oily with old favours, "you shouldn't have called my name." "Oh, Rick," I said, folding my arms. "We've been on first-name terms for years. Tonight you'll get to meet 2 more, Justice and Consequence." Mark stepped forward. "We don't want trouble, we want the truth. Hand over whatever you're looking for and leave." He laughed then. "You think this is as simple as handing over papers. Your husband made me a partner, and partners have rights." "Partners don't kill people and hide behind barns," I said. "Partners don't burn houses. Partners don't make widows find out last." His face flickered. For a second I thought he'd thrown in the towel. Then he did something I didn't expect. He pulled a small pistol from his jacket, like a man pulling a bad joke from a pocket. The metal glinted under the lantern like a promise. "Now listen," he said, steady but dangerous. "I came to claim what's mine. You hand over the fake, no cops, no drama, and I walk. You don't. People get hurt." At that moment, Sheriff Alvarez's lights blinked on down the lane like half-time fireworks. Rick's eyes darted there, then back to us. He made a move, slow, decisive, reaching for the trunk. "Now!" I said, and Mark opened the box. The fake papers were arranged deliberately as bait. Rick lunged, hand out, finger tight on the trigger. The barn filled with the smell of dust and fear. A shot cracked. Time divides neatly sometimes. Before the sound itself, and the silence after. I remember each in a ribbon of images, Kevin's wrench swinging, Miss Lila's cardigan flashing, Mark yelping, the pistol spinning from Rick's hand. Someone hit the floor. We all froze, lungs forgetting how to be useful. Then a voice, sharp as snapped twine, screamed a name. "Rick!" someone shouted. But when we ran toward the sound, it wasn't Rick on the ground. It was Sheriff Alvarez. Blood pooled like an ugly, persistent stain. He clutched his chest, face pinched with shock, more than pain. His radio skittered from his belt. Rick stumbled back in the doorway, eyes wide, guilt and surprise fighting for space. "I didn't," he started. "No," Kevin yelled. "You idiot! You shot!" Alvarez's hand went weak. He managed one croaked thing. Get him! Get him! Record capture!" Miss Lila moved like lightning disguised as an old woman. She was on Rick in 2 seconds, wrangling his arms and yanking the pistol from his grip with a strength that contradicted her cardigan. Mark grabbed the phone and clicked record. I leaned over the sheriff and pressed my shaking fingers to his wrist. It was still faint but angry with life. "You shot him?" I said, not to Rick, but to the night. Rick didn't answer. He went limp where Miss Lila held him, eyes hollow as the storm. The barn smelled of wet hay, gunpowder, and rain. Sirens, real ones, wailed in the distance. Through the barn slats, lightning sketched the world in impolite white. Sheriff Alvarez coughed, then smiled weakly, a ridiculous, brave thing. "Took you long enough," he rasped. Then he passed out, like a man who'd finally used up his luck. We were left in the echo, a captured man, a fallen sheriff, and a recorder running with everything he'd said. I looked. The fake folder lay in a puddle of lamplight, open and ridiculous. In the corner of the barn, where the real trunk had sat, an old stack of papers, one file scuffed as if someone had rifled through, was missing. I felt the cold, honest rush of dread. Rick had come for the papers. He'd fired, but not at the thing I expected. The recorders would catch his words. Yes, but the ledgers, they were gone. A siren grew louder. Miss Lila held Rick's wrists like a vice and hissed into my ear, "He's lying. There's more to this." He had help. I looked at Mark and I looked at Kevin, at my knees, at the place where my husband's secrets had slept. The storm hit full force, rain spitting like an audience. The recorder was still running. The sheriff was breathing, but barely. Rick was cuffed and swearing in a voice that tried to be big and failed. And someone I trusted less and less with each passing minute, stepped out from the shadows near the barn door. I knew that silhouette, and I knew, with the old and absolute certainty of one who's been underestimated all her life, that the real danger hadn't been captured yet. When the lightning flashed again, the silhouette at the door sharpened, tall, broad-shouldered, head bowed against the rain. For one absurd, fleeting second, I thought the storm had conjured my husband back from the dead to finish his own mess. But the man who stepped inside wasn't Frank. It was Kevin. And he wasn't empty-handed. He was holding the real ledgers, the ones I'd locked in my glove compartment, the ones that had vanished during the commotion. "Kevin," I said quietly, "tell me that's not what I think it is." He didn't answer. His hair was soaked, his face streaked with rain and guilt, and in his eyes that familiar flicker I hadn't seen since he was 10 years old and lying about breaking the neighbour's window. He'd done it again, just on a grander scale. Rick laughed a low, wet sound that mixed with thunder. "I told you," he rasped. "He was always his father's son. Miss Lila yanked him upright by the collar. Shut your mouth before I give you another hole to breathe through." Kevin looked from me to Mark, to the sheriff bleeding quietly on the floor. "You don't understand, Mom. I didn't mean for this to happen." I stepped forward. "Then tell me what you meant." He swallowed hard, water dripping off his chin. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to trade the papers for peace. He said if I brought them, no one would get hurt. He promised. "He promised?" I echoed. "Kevin, the man has a body count and an overdue conscience. What did you think was going to happen, tea and apologies?" "I thought," he said, voice cracking, "I could finally stop being the disappointment. That maybe I could fix what Dad broke." Something in me snapped, not loud, not violent, but quietly, cleanly. That sound you hear when you realize you've been holding your breath for 40 years. I stepped closer until we were face to face. "Kevin," I said softly, "you don't fix broken things by joining the people who broke them." The barn was still except for the rain hammering on the tin roof and the sheriff's shallow breathing. Mark moved toward Kevin slowly, cautious, like a man approaching a wounded animal. "She's right," he said. "Rick doesn't fix things. He uses people who want to." Kevin's jaw worked. His knuckles whitened on the folder. "I didn't give him everything, just a few pages, enough to make him trust me." My stomach dropped. "And where's the rest?" He hesitated. Then, from inside his jacket, he pulled out another envelope smaller, water-stained, sealed tight. He handed it to me. "Dad left this too. I found it in the back of the glove box after you went into the barn." I took it, hands trembling. The paper was warped, but the handwriting was unmistakable Frank's. I broke the seal. Inside, 1 page, and on it. If you're reading this, it means the past caught up. The Ridge money was never stolen. It was a setup. Rick and I were forced to move government funds during the construction project. Hush money. Black deals. I don't even know anymore. I tried to pull out, but by then it was too deep. I hid the evidence in the ledgers, and I made sure only my family could end it. If they find it, destroy it. It's not ours to spend. It's blood money. Don't let Kevin take the fall for me. F. For a moment, no one spoke. Kevin whispered, "He wanted you to destroy it?" I nodded slowly. "He wanted us to end it." Mark frowned. "If the feds see these, they'll trace every account. It'll take years." "Good," I said. "Maybe that's the punishment this family needs, a long, boring audit." Rick groaned from where Miss Lila had him pinned. "You think they'll believe you? You're old, your son's a thief, and your husband was a crook. That money will disappear into red tape." I turned to him, lightning cracking behind me like divine punctuation. "Then I'll make sure it disappears the right way." I took the folder from Kevin, stepped toward the barrel stove in the corner of the barn, and tossed the ledgers in. The pages caught fast, a hiss, a flare, a hungry orange glow. The ink turned to smoke, rising toward the rafters like ghosts, leaving their last address. Rick shouted something. I didn't care what. Miss Lila tightened her grip. Kevin stepped back, face pale. Mark put a hand on my shoulder, steady, grounding. When the last page turned to ash, the storm broke open, for real rain flooding through the cracked roof, hissing against the metal stove until steam rose like a curtain call. It was over. Finally, it was over. By dawn, the sheriff was stable, Rick was in custody, and the ridge smelled of wet hay and redemption. The police took statements, bagged evidence, and politely ignored my suggestion to let Miss Lila keep her gun, just in case. Kevin sat on the porch steps, silent. Mark joined him. They didn't talk, but they didn't need to. 2 brothers, one by blood, one by accident, both rebuilding the same last name. I stood watching them with the kind of tired peace that only comes after surviving your own story. When Mark stood to leave, he said quietly, "You know, he really did love you, Dad. He just didn't know how to stop lying to the people he loved most." "I know," I said. "It runs in the family." He smiled sadly. "I'll come back. Maybe help fix the fence. It looks like it needs both of us." As his car disappeared down the road, Kevin turned to me. "You're not mad." I looked at him, that foolish, infuriating, repentant boy I'd somehow raised into a man. "Oh, I'm mad," I said. "But not forever. You tried to fix what you broke. That's new for you. Keep doing that." He nodded, a flicker of a grin on his lips. "Guess we're starting over." I sighed. "Maybe this time, let's do it without any felonies." He laughed, really laughed, and for a moment I saw my husband's grin again. The good part. The part worth keeping. I turned toward the ridge, the mist rising off the wet earth, and thought of Frank. "You left a mess, old man. But somehow we cleaned it up one storm, one lie, one stubborn woman at a time. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling light over the mud, the fences, the fields that somehow still belonged to me. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace, unpolished but real." Later that morning, I sat at the table, writing one last note for my lawyer to add to my will. To whoever finds this mess next, the money's gone, the land's clean, and the truth is somewhere between the two. Don't dig it up again. Grow something instead. I smiled, folded it neatly, and poured myself another cup of coffee. Because some stories end not with revenge or redemption, but with a grandmother watching the sunrise over land she refused to let rot and thinking, finally, that'll do.